Hello and welcome to Wednesday's Wellness Tip. I'm Julie Crane and I'm so glad that you joined me today. Today we're going to be going over part 2 of Ready to Get Some Z's? Let's Sleep for Success. And I do have a confession because I said in part 1 that this was going to be a 2-part series, but there's so much good information to share that I'm not going to be able to get it done in just 2 parts. So we're going to extend it out to part 3. Now, in part 1, let's just review that a little bit. We discussed how getting the right amount and type of sleep is critical for many areas. It's critical for your energy, for your weight and body fat balance, for immunity, for health and longevity, and for performance. We also talked in part 1 about the 4 stages of sleep. And so you now know that there are 3 non-REM, REM standing for rapid eye movement. So 3 non-REM stages and 1 REM stage of sleep. And we discussed what's happening in the body and in the brain during each of these stages. The key points of that is non-REM sleep is body restorative. So this is where our body restores and rests. And in REM stage, this is brain restorative. So this is where the brain has an opportunity to rest and restore. So let's just talk about some of the sleep disturbances that can occur. There are basically 3 that typically occur. One is you lay down to go to sleep, but then you can't get to sleep. So you may lie awake for an extended period of time before sleep onset actually occurs. That's number 1. Number 2 is being able to stay asleep. Although they do say that it is normal to wake once or twice during the night to use the restroom. But I got to tell you, I much prefer to sleep through the night than to have to wake up. But at least if I wake up and I fall back to sleep, then I know that it hasn't really disturbed my sleep cycle. So as long as you can go right back to sleep, no big deal. But if you lay awake and more than 30 minutes or so pass and you still haven't fallen asleep, then that could be a problem. And it could be indicative that there is some kind of an issue or condition at play. And then the third one is just shallow sleep. So this is indicated by staying in stage 1 and stage 2 and never really getting into deeper sleep of stage 3 and stage 4. So those are the 3 top ones. But what's really important to remember is that sleep deprivation is physiologically stressing, meaning that it stresses the physical body because the body isn't able to get into that rest and recover stage. And it's also psychologically stressing because the brain is not able to get into its rest and restorative modes, which can then lead to issues the following day of irritable mood and anxiety and other problems. Excuse me while I get a little drink. So let's just talk about a couple of areas in the brain. So here in the front, across here, is what's called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is involved in many of the brain functions. It's through this area that we're able to self-regulate and plan ahead. It controls our behavior and our impulses. The prefrontal cortex helps us delay instant gratification needs. It regulates our emotions. Planning and decision making take place here. We can see and predict the consequences of our behavior because of the prefrontal cortex. We're able to see many streams of information, but yet we're also able to focus our attention. So kind of think of this as like the parent. The prefrontal cortex is the rational part of our brain. Now, if we look at another area in our brain that's called the amygdala is found deep in the center of the brain. And some of its primary roles include assigning value to moments and turning them into memory. So the moments that you're having today that you'll remember tomorrow is because the amygdala has assigned value to it. Decision making also occurs in the amygdala. Emotional responses such as fear, anxiety, and aggression occur in the amygdala. Fight, flight, and freeze responses happen here in the amygdala. So when the sympathetic nervous system is activated and fight, flight, and freeze occurs, it is here in the amygdala that is happening. The amygdala can actually even overreact, and then perceive subtle threats such as, a timer going off, or a sound hitting the ground, or the phone ringing, as though they were life-threatening. So when you're in that state of fight, flight, or freeze, everything is heightened. And so think of the amygdala kind of like our 4-year-old child. It is not rational. So this part of our brain can be very irrational. But the challenge is when we are sleep deprived, the amygdala takes over and starts being in charge. So not feeling safe will interfere with your quality of sleep. And because the amygdala has taken over, there is going to be a lack in the slow wave sleep, or stage 3 sleep. And what this will do ultimately is it will result in increased anxiety. So there is very much an association between poor sleep and anxiety and depression. So when the brain isn't able to rest and restore, but is in a heightened state of anxiety, it's going to create poor sleep. And then that poor sleep is going to put you into where you have a lack of those slow wave sleep, or stage 3 sleep, which is going to increase your anxiety, which then again, you're going to experience anxiety throughout the day and have more trouble sleeping. Can you see how this is just a cycle that continues to build on itself? So there's actually a high risk of depression associated with sleep disorders. But they have found, this is the good news, is that when you fix the sleep problem, it will oftentimes solve many of the problems of depression. So let's just review really quickly the 5 types of anxiety disorder. Maybe you can consider this if you're experiencing anxiety or aren't sure. Maybe this will help you be able to identify if you are experiencing one of these types of anxiety disorders. So the first one is generalized anxiety disorder. So it's just kind of like it sounds. It's more generalized. People that are in this typically experience a lot of restlessness, fatigue. They may have an excessive amount of anxiety and worry. Increased muscle aches and soreness often accompany somebody that's experiencing generalized anxiety disorder. Their concentration may be impaired, so they have difficulty concentrating, might be irritable, and definitely experiencing difficulty sleeping. So the second one is obsessive compulsive disorder. So people with excessive compulsive disorder experience anxiety, but with theirs, a lot of their anxiety is within these cycles of compulsion, relief, and obsessions. So they just cycle through that compulsion, relief, and obsessions. So for instance, somebody that may have an obsession about whether or not their door is locked, then they will have the compulsion to go check the door to make sure that the door is locked. Then they'll receive a relief after they check it, yes, and they find that it's locked. But then they'll step right back into that obsession a few minutes later in that, did they really check the door? Was it really locked? And they'll have to have, through that compulsion, they'll have to go back and check the door again to make sure it's locked. Then once they find that it's locked, then they'll experience that little bit of relief. But they continue to cycle through that. The third type of anxiety disorder is PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, people that are experiencing PTSD often relive the event or the trauma that they experienced. They'll have nightmares. They experience an extensive amount of insomnia, so they do not sleep well at all. And if they do get into a REM stage of sleep, oftentimes the amount of eye movement that they experience is significantly increased from what would be considered, a normal amount of rapid eye movement. So what we need to know about these three is that poor sleep is often a prodromal event to depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So often poor sleep leads out and resulting in depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder again, and then it cycles. So the fourth kind is mixed anxiety and depression. So people that experience this both have feelings of depression, such as hopelessness, helplessness, maybe a desire to not continue to be here on this planet or not know why they're here, and just kind of a lack of life force, while still experiencing these feelings of anxiety. And then the fifth one is a social anxiety disorder. Now, these are folks that tend to have more anxiety when they're out in the public. So these people will avoid going out amongst other people or out in the public and will want to stay within their controlled home environment because they feel safe there. But as soon as they step outside of that, or sometimes if something comes into that safe environment that doesn't feel safe, then they will have this increased social anxiety. So those are the 5 types of anxiety. So just maybe out of curiosity, notice if any of these affect you, because they could be affecting your sleep. So some other interesting things about sleep disturbances is that they've actually found that there's an increased risk of Parkinson's disease with those who have sleep disturbance. So 20% of the people with daytime sleepiness will end up with Parkinson's. So this is really interesting too, because if you watched my videos on hydration, we noticed that if you are in a chronic dehydration state, that can also lead to Parkinson's disease. So again, chronic dehydration leads to daytime sleepiness, which is a sleep disturbance and can increase your risk at Parkinson's. So this is one that you really want to look at increasing and get into optimal hydration. Also, sleep disturbance can occur with people that have bipolar disorder. Oftentimes, people with bipolar disorder may only sleep about 4 hours a night, and they may feel like that's normal. Perhaps somebody else in their family is someone that only sleeps a very short period of time. But it's actually related to a disrupted circadian pattern due to the bipolar disorder. And so they still are not getting the quality and quantity of sleep that the body is in need of, even though they may awaken feeling energy, or depending on whether they're in an up or in a down cycle of their bipolar disease. But again, bipolar often is affected or is associated with short sleep, and again, that's due to a disrupted circadian pattern. Another thing that disrupts the circadian pattern is the daylight savings time change. So when I'm talking about a circadian pattern or circadian rhythm, what I'm talking about is the biological regulation of sleep patterns responding to natural light and natural dark. So when we go into especially the spring daylight savings time, is we lose that hour of sleep, which will disrupt and misalign our circadian rhythms. And this can lead to some huge health impacts. So They've done studies on this, and they have found that during this time following the change in daylight savings time, that there is increased heart disease, so people coming in with heart issues into the hospital. It negatively affects brain functionality. It decreases productivity, so we see less productivity at work following daylight savings times. Increased strokes, so more people coming into the hospital experiencing strokes following the change in daylight savings time. There's also sleep deprivation that's seen among children and adolescents during this time. Increased cancer rates, wow, and increased automobile accidents. So it's really important to understand that that change can really make a huge difference, so that we can kind of prepare ourselves, try to go to sleep a little bit earlier or shift as much as possible. So this kind of brings us to the end of what I wanted to talk about today. And next week, we're going to be going into part 3, where we're going to talk more about what to do and what to avoid in order to support our bodies in getting better sleep. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.